Though the president has strong support from evangelical Christians, there's a deep split over his approval among Catholic voters.
That's right. Real Clear Opinion Research and EWTN, the Catholic television network, conducted a survey of some 1,500 Catholic voters. Though the study found that President Trump's standing among all Catholics is stronger than it was last year, he still trails his Democratic rivals. About 1 in every 5 Catholics identifies themselves as devout, voters for whom the church's teachings and practices play a huge part in their daily lives, and who tend to be much more conservative. Almost 2 out of the 3 plan to vote to re-elect President Trump. For many other Catholic voters, it's just the opposite. They tend to be more liberal on social issues and are more likely to vote for one of the Democratic candidates.
And here now to discuss the new poll is Matthew Bunson, executive editor and Washington bureau chief of EWTN News. Matthew, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Tell us, what did you find most interesting about this poll?
Well, if we're trying to decide or to determine where exactly Catholics are as we're heading into the very contentious 2020 election, one of those clear barometers is how Catholics live their lives, how engaged they are with the Catholic faith. And so the results were quite striking in the sense that the more you tend to be committed to the teachings of the Catholic faith, the more you're likely to be voting on some of the key moral and social issues of our time, but in particular, where you stand on Donald Trump.
Matthew, how strong of a voting bloc are we talking about with Catholic voters?
Well, there's always been an assumption that Catholics are this kind of monolithic voting bloc. In fact, it's incredibly diverse. Catholics, for the most part, look like average voters. They're fellow Americans. Catholics have voted consistently with the winner of presidential elections for almost all of the elections in the last 60 years, with the exception, of course, of John F. Kennedy, who carried about 90-some% of the Catholic vote, unsurprisingly. But what we're seeing with Catholics today is that there is that subset that you were just talking about, about 18%, about a fifth of the Catholic vote, that lives and votes very differently from their fellow Catholics, and in many ways from their fellow Americans.
You were just talking about it not being a monolithic group, even though people might assume devout Catholics as such. So can you get into the weeds a little bit more and explain what this looks like as far as gender and all the other demographics within the Catholic group?
This is one of the most interesting and surprising takeaways, too, from this poll. We surveyed only Catholics this time. In our first poll back in November, December, we looked at all Americans and then at Catholics. This time we're looking only at Catholics, and in that group in particular. The assumption always is that this sort of devout Catholic group is going to be old, white, and male. What we found is that 52% are women, about 48% are under the age of 45, a third is under the age of 35, and it's 41% Latino or Hispanic. So it is a very surprising and diverse group of American Catholics.
Yeah. So because, more than half of this devout, diverse group backs the president, does this then just suggest that he's not just supported by older white men?
That's absolutely correct. And the fact that there is strong support for him among Latinos within that subset. Now, overall, the president does not do particularly well among Hispanic or Latino voters. But with this group, it is a kind of firewall within the Latino vote itself. But we're also seeing, because this is such a diverse group, that it cuts across all genders, age groups, education. So the president has his own, to use that term again, firewall among Catholic voters with this group. One of the key takeaways, too, with this is that 58% of Catholics vote consistently. 75% of devout Catholics vote consistently. So they are much more motivated, and they tend to vote on a much more regular basis.
So not a group that you can ignore.
Exactly. If the president's going to be reelected, he has to carry this group again, as he did in 2016.
Matthew, you hinted that this poll wasn't just about politics. Any surprises when it comes to the divide, as we hinted about, when you're looking at cultural issues and social issues?
Yes. What we found with this poll, as we saw with the first poll, is we assume, and have assumed for some time, is that there is a gulf within the Catholic community. Of those who follow the teachings of the Church tend to look at cultural and moral issues in one way. Those who don't look at it another way that, again, resembles the average public. What we found is that those who follow the teachings of the Church very closely are very strong in their opposition to abortion, to euthanasia, assisted suicide, the use of bathrooms by those who choose their own gender, on marriage between a man and a woman, whereas with those who are less committed to the teachings of the Church, they, again, on much lower levels, are in favor of abortion. The majority of them, in fact, consider abortion to be legal, that they support it. Same thing on euthanasia, same thing, again, on physician-assisted suicide.
It's complicated to be a candidate.
It really is. Hopefully they're paying attention to your survey.
Right.
Well, again, the Catholic vote in 2020, as it was in 2016, is going to be very tight. It's going to be very close for any candidate running. It's going to come down to a couple of points in either direction, and whoever can motivate that base. And Donald Trump at least has a leg up on his Democrat rivals. Now, let's stress again, he's trailing all of his Democrat rivals at this point, but 54% of all Catholics are open at least to voting for him. With the economy as strong as it is, and with so many Catholics across the board saying that they are better off financially and that the country is better off financially than it was 4 years ago, there's a lot of room for the president here.
And that's probably why his standing is higher than it was
Exactly.
before. All right, Matthew Bunson, Washington Bureau Chief and Executive Editor of EWTN, thank you so much for being with us.